Welcome to cloudonaut Plus, your source of exclusive videos and online events for AWS professionals. My name is Michael, and today I show you the benefits of the new JavaScript SDK version 3 that was released or made general available by AWS in December. So what can you expect from this video? First, I give you a short introduction into the JavaScript SDK for version 3. We talk about the good parts, but also about the bad parts. We will look into a couple of migration examples. So we'll look into real code. So how have I converted that code using previously version 2, now using version 3. So how could I benefit from all the new features in that code base? And we're also looking at the build configuration that we use in that project to bundle all this code using ESBuild and then deploy it to a Lambda function. So that's the goal of this video. So what is new about the AWS SDK for JavaScript in the new version, and why is it something that you should kind of know of? So first, since mid-December, it is generally available. So it's recently new. So that's why we talk about it here in the video. It is implemented in TypeScript, doesn't really change anything for you as a consumer. You can still use it with JavaScript. You can still use it with TypeScript. It's the same thing as before. It is mostly compatible with the version 2 of the SDK, but if you want to benefit from the new features, then it requires refactoring, so keep that in mind. If you only switch over to version 3, that's possible, but you don't really benefit from that whole journey. So let's first talk about the good parts of the SDK. So why should you actually use it? First, it comes with native implementation for pagination. So you might remember this in version 2 of the SDK. All the APIs that return a list. So for example, this could be listing all the S3 buckets, listing all the objects, describing all the EC2 instances. They require that you as a programmer implement pagination logic. So you get back from AWS a token, and then you make another call with that token from the previous call. You get the next page and again until you reach the end of the pages. So this is now implemented natively in the SDK. So you don't have to do this manually anymore. So this improves your productivity. Also, what's new, if you are using promises in the version 2 of the SDK, you always write .promise to get back a promise. That's no longer needed in version 3. You always get back a promise if you don't specify a callback. So that's just the new default behavior, which makes less room for errors, and it also kind of reduces the amount of typing you have to do if that is an important metric to you. Another important part that is probably the reason why people switch to version 3 of the SDK is that it is now modularized, which means every service has its own package on NPM that contains only the client for that service. So if you only deal with DynamoDB, you only need the DynamoDB client, not the other 199 clients from all the other services, which of course reduces the size of the NPM package significantly. The other benefit is that the version 3 SDK now uses ES6 modules, which empowers us to use tree shaking to eliminate dead code. So if you, for example, include the DynamoDB SDK in your code, but you only use a single operation, maybe the get item operation, with tree shaking, you will be able to remove all the code that is not needed for all the other operations. So the bundle size will be significantly smaller again, because everything is removed that is not about getting an item, which is a very powerful technique. And if you're into front-end development, then you are likely aware of that like technology. And now it's possible with the AWS SDK as well. So now let's talk about the problems of the new SDK. So what's bad about it? First, one thing that I miss is X-ray support. So in our projects, we usually connect the SDK with X-ray, which means all the calls that the SDK makes are automatically captured and sent to X-ray. So when I look at X-ray, I get a nice trace. This is the request coming in. It reaches out to DynamoDB. It reaches out to S3. I get all the latencies. So I get a good understanding of what's going on. And this is simply not possible with version 3 at the moment. There is a pull request that is worked on, so we hope that we see support for that in the coming weeks, but keep that in mind, at the moment it's not supported. The other problem, if you are a Lambda developer, is that the version 3 SDK is not included in the Lambda runtime. So if you want to use it, you have to package it into your zip file. So version 2 is always available in the Lambda runtime. So as long as you're happy with the version that AWS provides, you do not have to include this dependency in your package, which means it doesn't grow the size of your package at all. If you use version 3 of the SDK, you automatically grow the package size a little bit because you add this extra dependency. So keep that in mind. If that is important for you, then you might are better off with the version 2 of the SDK. Another feature that most people, or a lot of people miss, so I reached out on Twitter and asked people about their experiences, and this was one of the things that was mentioned most often as a problem, is that in version 3 there is no document client anymore for DynamoDB. So what is document client doing? You can send document client a JavaScript object and it takes care of the serialization and deserialization, so which means basically strings are converted to an object that with key S, and then the value of the object, a number is converted to an object with key N, and the value is the string of the number. So this is kind of DynamoDB typing things. It's not available in version 3. Instead, there are helper or utils functions, but you have to call them every time before you invoke a DynamoDB call, which is a little bit inconvenient, I would say. So I'm not a user of the document client because I really like things to be explicit. So that's why I always write the DynamoDB types down. But if you are a heavy user of the document client, that could be a problem for you. So last but not least, client-side monitoring is missing. If you watched the first video in cloudonaut Plus, which was about debugging IAM policies or making sure that you can kind of only include the actions that are really needed, you learned that lots of API calls are missing in CloudTrail. For example, all the calls to DynamoDB, S3, and so on and so forth, Kinesis. With client-side monitoring, you are able to capture all those calls because the SDK actually records them and makes them available on a UDP port. But version 3 of the SDK does not support that yet. So there is no way for you to get client-side monitoring up and running. So again, that's kind of a problem that you could run into. All right, so that's the theory. Now we go looking into the practice. So what I'm going to show you is code from a real project we are working on, Marbot, our chatbot. Basically, Marbot is about something happens in your AWS account, something bad happens in your AWS account. We capture that and we forward it to Slack or Microsoft Teams that your team is notified. So we help you with the monitoring setup. Basically, that's kind of the value proposition. And I will show you in one code example that basically captures all the benefits of the new SDK in a few lines. So you will be surprised how many features can be used at once. And this is a real code, so it's not something that I created artificially. So it's really code that we run. So that's pretty cool. The other thing that I want to show you after that is how we build using ESBuild for Marbot packages with this tree-shaking approach. So eliminate all the code that is not needed. And we will look into that quickly as well. So that's it. Let's switch into my editor. All right, so let's look at the code. So the first thing that you will notice is that I'm using ES6 modules style to import dependencies. You can, of course, use require to do the same thing. So there's no requirement from the SDK that you have to use import from. You can still use require if you like. So what I'm doing here is I use the DynamoDB client. So as I mentioned, we now have a package dependency for every service. And for that specific service, I import three different things. One is the DynamoDB client itself. I import the update item command, and I import the paginate scan function. So this is what I need in my code base. So what is this code base doing? First, it returns all items of a DynamoDB table, and then it updates each item. So that's kind of what the code does. So let's look into how this works. And I'm starting with a little helper function that updates an item. So what we are doing here is we call the DynamoDB client, and then there is a single operation called send. And we call that, and we invoke it with the update item command. So that's what I imported before. And it receives exactly the same attributes as you passed into the update item command in version 2. So it's exactly the same structure. So the only difference is that you now call the send method and you don't call the update item method anymore. So that's that gives you the power of 3 shaking later on. So that's the kind of change that you have to make. So you have to replace all the calls to specific operations using the send method, and then you use this command style to pass in the data. But the structure of the command input here is exactly the same, so you can use exactly the same thing. So basically what you do is dynamodb.update item, so that was what you have written before, and you replaced it with this line, and then you are fine. What you also see here is that the send command returns a promise by default, so there is no .promise here anymore at the end of the code base. If you look into the definition of the file, you will see that it actually returns a promise. So that's the new, like the promise feature by default that you get. So if you don't pass a callback, you get a promise. If you would pass a callback function here, then it doesn't return a promise anymore. So if you use something like this, then there is no promise returned here anymore. So that's a good thing. Yeah, keep that in mind when you work with the new SDK. So let me see that I removed that properly. Okay, so that's working with the new promises approach, and this is how you use the new command approach in the SDK. Now we look at the last point, pagination. All right, so before you can actually do anything, you create a client, and this works very similar than before. The only difference is that now you always have to pass in the configuration of the client. So before there was this like global AWS config method or object where you could configure things for all clients at once. That's not possible anymore. Now you have to configure each and every client, which I did before. This is not a big change for me, but if you use the global configuration, keep in mind that now you have to configure each and every client. So that's it. So now we have the client. And now we want to use this new paginate scan helper function. It scans a DynamoDB table, and it takes 2 inputs. One is the configuration, and the configuration gets 2 important attributes. One is the client itself, so that's the DynamoDB client here. And the other one is the page size. So this is optional. You don't have to specify that. But in my case, I like to specify it, and we will see why in a couple of seconds. So the other thing that you kind of insert is the input. So this is, again, following more or less the same strategy as before. So for example, if you would filter something here, you would add that there as well. So it takes the same attributes as a DynamoDB scan operation before. The only thing that you do not have to add here is the exclusive start key stuff. So you don't have to care about pagination actually, which is cool. So in this case, I only pass in the table name. So this is how I create my paginator. So the paginator itself does not really do anything. So we have to iterate over the paginator to actually get the pages out of it. And this is how it works. It uses a new construct of JavaScript. It's called the for-off loop. And in the for-off loop, we actually await the paginator. So whenever there's a new page available, basically, we get the page into the page variable, and then this block of code is executed here. And it runs as long as there are new pages available. And what I do here now is I get all the items. So page.items contains all the items returned by DynamoDB for that page. And in this case, I map over them. I call the update item operation, which returns a promise. And then I wrap that array of promises into a promise.all and await that, which basically means I wait for all the promises to resolve before I go on looking at the next page. So that's what the code does. And it is now significantly shorter than before. As you can see, it is like more or less, this is more or less 50 lines of code, but there's lots of boilerplate and stuff like here. So you could maybe reduce that to 40 lines. Before that, it was 150 lines roughly. So that's really cool. And I like that new code much more than what I had before. So that's it. Those are all the features of the SDK. So pagination, this is how it works. So you have to import a function. So if you look at what's available, so for example, paginate, so we have, we can list the tables, the exports, the query, a paginate query. So if you run a query that returns a page response. So this is kind of what you get here. Depending on the service, this will be different. So it's highly customized to the service. So just check out the available things. It always starts with paginate, so that's very easy to find. All right. That was the first thing. The other thing is the new command style invocation of the SDK with the .send method. So that helps for tree shaking. So keep that in mind. And last but not least, you don't have to write .promise anymore. So that's kind of the recap of all these changes in a code base that is pretty small. So, but I hope you still got all the ideas and all the new features here in a like easy to understand manner. So let's look at how we build this code. So Marbot consists of maybe around 40 or 50 Lambda functions, and each Lambda function has different code inside, obviously. And what we want to do is we want to only include the code that is needed for that function in the bundle, because bundles should be as small as possible to kind of make sure that functions start up as fast as possible if they are cold started, so when they're called the first time. And what we use to do that is a recent or a tool that is maybe getting some traction, but it is not around for long. It's called ESBuild. And with ESBuild, you can bundle JavaScript code, and it also supports tree shaking, which does that code elimination. So it's a perfect fit in combination with the new AWS SDK. And as you can see, what we do is for each and every Lambda function, we have a JavaScript file, and this is what we call the entry point. So in my case, this is coming from an array of stuff, but just imagine this is the path to a single file. We tell it that it should bundle. We want it to run on platform node. It also works for browsers. That's why you can specify the platform. We don't want to include the AWS SDK. So that's the old version. So that's the version 2. I still have that in the code base. So I don't want to put that into the bundle because I know it's there on Lambda functions already. We don't want to minify the code. Otherwise, you will not really be able to understand any of the errors that is thrown. So there's no way for you to understand where in your code base something went wrong. So I don't want to do that. If you run this on a browser, you can minify, but then you have the source map. So basically you can kind of reconstruct where in your code it actually happened. But that's not really going to work here. I target node 12, which is the latest node runtime available on AWS Lambda. And then for every entry point, which means for every Lambda function, I create a folder, which is the out dir, and there's a little typo in here as I see. And then I call this file the bundle.js. And what happens if you run this script, which is just a JavaScript script. So there's no kind of magic. It's just you run node ESBuild, and then it runs this code, and it works. And what we get is, now I have to quickly jump into this code base here, is we get, for example, this file. And if you just look at such a file, you will not really be able to understand much of what's going on here. And that's also not our job. So this is just for the computer. It contains everything in a single file. All the JavaScript stuff is in a single file here, which is pretty cool. And then I use that file and I reference it in my CloudFormation templates. I configure it in a way that I say, okay, this code comes from this folder. And within that folder, you will find the bundle.js file and always the handler, like the exported function is called handler. And that's it. That's the whole magic. And with this approach, within a couple of seconds, we create the bundle files for all of our Lambda functions. And with this change, we are very happy because we reduced the cold start times of all the functions significantly. And also the deployment is just much faster because our bundles are much smaller. So it has several advantages, even if you're not really optimizing for cold starts. I would always recommend this in a project that's a little bit bigger and uses more than a couple of functions. So there will be a link to an example in the video description. So if you want to follow that, check out the links in the video description, and you will be able to kind of reproduce that in your environment. All right, so let's have a quick summary. Let's jump back into our slides. So what's the biggest advantages, or when should you actually start using the new SDK? So if you are a front-end developer, I would recommend that you adopt the new version 3 immediately and also migrate old code to the new version 3 SDK, because it will significantly decrease the size of your code that you ship to your end users over the wire. So that's really the kind of the use case that really, where the new SDK really shines, is front-end development using the AWS SDK. So now we are talking about the backend. So if you talk about the backend, it is a little bit more tricky. So if you are a Lambda developer, I would not see big advantages in adopting version 3 of the SDK immediately. So you should probably wait for X-ray support, you probably wait for client-side monitoring, and maybe just kind of observe what's going on in this space. But there is no huge advantage. I assume that you are not really doing lots of pagination code in your Lambda functions, because this is like, if you paginate in your Lambda function, chances that you will run out of the execution time at some point in time are very high. So that's why usually I don't really paginate in my functions themselves. I use like step functions that kind of orchestrate the pagination. And in this case, you will not benefit from the pagination helper. So yeah, always, if you are like very happy about the new pagination helper, keep that in mind, that it's kind of unpredictable runtime. And it is also, the other problem is that you might run out of memory if you store all the results in the in memory in the meantime. So yeah, keep that in mind when you work with the paginators. So it's always kind of I would say kind of a code smell if I see that in code that is called by users, because it's completely unpredictable latencies then, because you don't really know how much data there is consumed in the pagination. The other use case is if you're not running on a Lambda function, you run on something else, then I would say you can adopt version 3 of the SDK for new projects. I don't see big benefits in migrating because, yeah, what's really is the benefit here besides the dot promise stuff and the pagination things. So yeah, that's kind of my kind of summary. So at least how I kind of treat it. I haven't rewritten all the Marbot code, for example, using the version 3 SDK. The only thing that I rewrote are the helper scripts that I showed you. So this is basically stuff that we run from time to time to kind of make sure that our data is consistent, or that we run to make sure that all the subscriptions are still activated and things like this. So yeah, keep that in mind. There is not so much benefit in migrating your whole project here. That is probably not worth it. So that's it. If you have any questions about the new SDK, feel free to visit community.cloudonaut.io. Ask your question. We are always happy to help you there. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to like this video if you learned something new today. Your feedback helps us to produce relevant videos. You can reach us via Twitter or via email. The details are in the video description below. We are back in 1 week. Thanks for your support. Bye.